removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea, and though its waters roar and be troubled, and though the mountains shake with its swelling. Selah. There is a river whose streams shall make glad. The city of Elohim, of God, the holy place of the tabernacle of the Most High. God is in the midst of her, and she shall not be moved. He shall help her just at the break of dawn. The nations raged. The kingdoms were moved. He uttered his voice, and the earth melted. Yahweh Tzvaot, the Lord of hosts, is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge, Selah. And behold the works of Adonai, who has made desolation in the earth. Look at he breaks the bow and cuts the spear in two. He burns the chariot in the fire. Be still and know that I am Elohim, that I'm God, and I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Selah. Selah. How many know he's our refuge? Yes. Now I'm going to take you to 2 Kings. 2 Kings 2, starting at verse 13. He also took up the mantle of Eliyahu that had fallen from him, and he went back and he stood by the bank of the Jordan, speaking of Elijah, or Elisha. And then he took the mantle of Eliyahu that had fallen from him, and he struck the water, and he said, "Where is Adonai, the God of Eliyahu?" When he also had struck the water, it was divided this way and that. And Elisha crossed over, and now when the sons of the prophets who were from Jericho saw him, they said, "The spirit of Eliyahu rests on Elisha." And they came to meet him and bowed down before him. And then they said to him, "Look now, there are 50 strong men with your servants. Please let them go and search for your master, lest perhaps the spirit of Adonai has taken him up and cast him upon some of the mountain or into some valley." Now you got to get the picture here. Eliyahu has been taken up by what the Jews call the Merkabah. It was the chariot of the Most High. Came down and swooped him up and took him away. So the prophets meet Elisha, and they say, "Hey, we're going to go look for him." And he's telling them, "Don't waste your time. He's gone. Don't waste your time looking. He's gone." Well, they keep persisting and keep persisting. Maybe he's on a mountain. Can you imagine that the father pick him up and just kind of drop him on a mountain somewhere? You know? Who knows what condition we'll be finding him in, but he may be on a mountain. He says, "Don't worry about it. He's already gone." Watch. When they urged him till he was ashamed, he said, "Send them." Therefore they sent 50 men, and they searched for 3 days, but they did not find him. And when they came back to him, for he had stayed in, I'm missing that bottom part, please. Can we pull up something and help us with that? He had stayed in Jericho. Now I want you to see the story here. Go to this. The men of the city said to Elisha, "Please notice the situation of this city is pleasant, as my Lord sees, but the water is bad and the ground is barren." And he said, "Bring a new bowl, bring me a new bowl." And he put salt in it, and so they brought it to him. And then he went out to the source of the water. Everyone say water. Water. Cast in the salt there, and he said, "Thus says Adonai, I have healed this water, and from it there shall be no more death or barrenness." So the water remains healed to this day, according to the word of Elisha, which he spoke. Give your neighbor a hug. You can be seated. We're the huggingest congregation. Probably why we're all sneezing. So last week and the last couple of weeks we've learned about harpu. Everyone say harpu. Harpu had to do with cease and desist. Be still and know that I am Elohim, that I am God, he says. And Psalm 46 talks about the nations raging, that the kingdoms would come. And what we've seen time and time again over thousands of years of Israel, that Adonai has called his people out of the land. Out of Abraham comes and walks the walk, establishes in the land. So we see that a city is set up, not only a nation, but now a city by David. Zion. Everyone say Zion. Zion is kind of the spiritual name of Jerusalem, if you think about it. Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim Shel Zehah. Anybody ever hear that song? Jerusalem of gold. Jerusalem is a city that is set up on a hill, and it is Adonai's city. That is the city where his people would be seen at. That is the capital city. That's the place. Everyone say the place. Hebrew, Hamakom, it's the place. It's where the temple would reside, the first and the second temple. It's where the sacrifices would take place. This is the very city where Yeshua himself would come clothed in flesh to walk into his temple. This is the city, Jerusalem. Yireh Shalom. Yireh means I will see. How many of you ever heard the old church song Jehovah Jireh? Terrible translation of that name. But Yireh or Jireh, what they would say, Yireh means to see, to be able to perceive with the eye and see. Yireh Shalom, Jerusalem. It is the city where he said, I will see to its peace. I will see to its wholeness. Though the nations rage, Psalm 46, though the nations rage, and remember what water represents. Water represents troubles and turmoils and trials. And we see many times in the Tanakh that waters would rush up. How many of you ever had a flood of waters come against you? We'll pray for those that have not lifted their hands because you're in for a treat at some point in your life. We talked about the flood and how the flood has a voice, right? Scripture tells us that the waves have a voice, a spiritual voice, and they come to attack. And so we see that the nations rage in Psalm 46, and they rise up time and time again to attack Jerusalem, Adonai's holy city, the place where he said, I will see to its peace, its shalom. Everyone say shalom. Shalom. Shalom doesn't mean a quiet, nice place where you're having a cup of tea. Shalom means wholeness with nothing missing. Right. Nothing is broken. That everybody's in its place, and everything is good. It's shalom. How many like shalom? Adonai says, Yireh Shalom, the place that I will bring it about. And listen to me, time and time again, the adversary says, oh yeah? As God said. Why do you think he attacks Jerusalem? Why do you think he attacks us? He's promised us shalom. Why do you think the floods rise up and the waves roar? Because the enemy says, oh yeah, has God said? Let's see. What's he always saying? Has God said? All the way from Bereshit, Genesis. Has God really said? What's he say to Yeshua? Yeshua's temptation. The first time we see Yeshua being tempted. If you are God's son. Well, what happened to Yeshua before that? He was in the water. Everybody say water. Water. He comes out of the water, and there's a voice from heaven that says, this is my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased. And some say it must have thundered. Yeshua knew it was a witness to who he was. It was a witness to those who could hear what the voice was saying. And so now here's the enemy who says, oh yeah, has God really said it? Your father, have you ever been in that place where, has God really said it? Make you doubt, and then the waters rise up and they trouble, and they floods rising up with their wind and their waves. And they come against Jerusalem time and time again. And we are in a season, guys, where right before the Messiah comes back, you know and I know that the nations are going to come against Jerusalem one more time. And they're going to surround Jerusalem. Scripture says that the anti-Messiah will actually make a covenant of shalom and attempt to bring a false shalom or a false peace to Adonai's people. But how many know that's not going to work? As God really said, shalom. Yireh Shalom. Why is it that the waters rage all the time? Why is it that people who once we were face to face with Adonai and with each other, once we were face to face, but now back to back? Broken relationship. Why is that? Because of why? One word. Sin. Everybody say sin. We don't really hear a lot about sin, or people usually don't teach a whole lot about sin lately. I think that for the most part, we all know what we think what sin is. I know that we were once sinners, saved by Adonai's grace, right? We don't have to tell people to remind us that we have a sinful nature, right? How many of you still, it's a part of nature, but you have a new heart, a good heart. Yeshua gave us that new heart. But I want us to see real quick this morning, because we're talking about the roaring of the nations, and why do people fuss with each other? Why do nations and even individuals fuss with one another? It's because of sin. If I were to ask you this morning, what's your definition of sin? I'm going to ask you. Tell me one at a time. John Paul, go ahead.
Rebellion against God and His Word.
Missing the target of Torah.
Okay. Anybody else? All good answers.
Disobedience.
Disobedience.
Missing the mark.
Missing the mark.
Not doing what he tells us to do.
There you go. Yes?
Grumbling.
Grumbling. Yes. Pete?
Facing away from God.
Okay. Yes, that connection is broken, and now it's back to back and not face to face. If you're face to face, you have shalom. If you're back to back, there's no shalom. Yes, ma'am?
Failing to live up, that we were made in his image, and we failed to do that.
All good answers. You're right, and it's all good answers. You said exactly, all of you, what sin is. But for the most part, sin, I think, within the church today, and within some people's mindset, sin is this, it's a bad thing, and it is bad. But hear me, sin, they think of sin as one thing when that's not really sin. There's actually 3 words that I want to look at today, because we're talking about the raging of the waters and the nations and wars and rumors of wars. We're going to see that in this day, folks. Messiah is coming back. He said that would be a sign.
Right.
The roars would happen. The nations would come against each other. They're going to come against Jerusalem ultimately. But why is that? Let's look at, just for a moment, I want you to see various definitions of sin within the Hebrew culture and within Tanakh itself. So we're going to look at this. The first is pesha. Everyone say pesha. Pesha is deliberate, it's intentional sin. It's an act committed in deliberate defiance against God. Pesha has to do with rebellion. Everyone say rebellion. So when we talk about rebellion, we're talking about somebody like Nimrod. Remember Nimrod? Who said, I'm going to institute false worship. But he didn't call it false worship. He said, we're going to worship the other, we're going to make gods. We're going to be in idolatry. That is defiance. That is utter rebellion in your face. I'm doing it anyhow. How many parents do we have? How many have ever dealt with pesha and your children? I'm going to do it anyhow. Oh yeah? Let's look at the next. Father, help us. Deliver us from pesha. Next is avon. Everyone say avon. Now don't worry, ladies. That's not avon. Although it could be connected because it says it's a sin of lust or emotion. So no. Avon is a sin of lust or emotion. This is moral iniquity. This is what we would call within society a moral failure. And we're certainly seeing that. All you have to do is turn on the news. I'm always amazed as to how people just don't check. They don't check themselves. We have what's called the Yetzer Hara within us, that concept of the flesh. And the flesh always wants to do what it wants to do. And there's times that you have to say to the flesh, no.
We make ourselves gods.
Look at number 3. Het. Everyone say het. Now this is what I've heard several of you say, and this is correct as well. Het means to miss the mark. But het can also mean unintentional crime or fault. How many of you know that you can sin against somebody unintentionally? Realize that? Sure you can. You can park in somebody's parking space and not know that you offended them. You really can. You can do little things. You can accidentally cut somebody off in traffic. You can say something that you didn't mean it to sound like that, but it came out like that. You missed the mark. Now, I think for the most part, het can be defined as all of us missing the mark at some point. Why do we miss the mark? Why do we sin? Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's not. If we are made in the image of Elohim, of Adonai himself, he's perfect. Adam in the garden was perfect in the beginning, but then he rebelled. Which sin would that come under? Pesha. How about, did he miss the mark though? He sure did. How about lust or emotion? How about moral iniquity? My point is this. When Adam sinned, did this cover all of the bases of sin when Adam did that? What he did? Everybody say all bases. And how many of you are children, sons and daughters of Adam? Guess what? We have missed all of those. We have missed, so the Father comes along, he says, this is my kingdom, and this is what I want you to do, and we have missed the mark. That is sin. Why do nations rage? Because of sin. In fact, Genesis 8:21 tells us this. Adonai smelled a soothing aroma after the flood of waters. Notice again the waters. Why did the waters come, guys? The floods came because of sin. There was a disconnect. People were acting rebellious. They were doing whatever they wanted to do. And notice this. Adonai, after the waters, said, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake. Although the imagination, watch this, of man's heart is evil from his youth continually, the Hebrew says. You know what Scripture tells us? That even as little children, our hearts have always been wanting to go astray.
Right.
Even as little children. Interesting, isn't it? Get mighty quiet in here. Myra, we may have to get you to shake them. Get out there and shake them. You and Gary, go out and He says this, he says, even his children, he says, he knows that people are just people. Now, he's not making an excuse for it, but he says, that's mankind. And this is who we are. You won't hear this so much in some traditional Jewish circles. They don't believe in original sin. Not everybody believes that. So it's interesting. We believe in the Word and what it says, that all men are sinners. We've all missed the mark. Genesis 4:6. I want you to see something. One of the first times that we see sin mentioned specifically is in Bereshit 4. Adonai said to Cain, why are you angry? And why is your countenance fallen? You know what it goes on to say? It says sin is crouching at your door. Cain and Abel, two brothers. Everybody say two brothers. Two brothers. Michael, stand up. You know that they were twins? The rabbis teach that they were twins. Now, obviously we don't look alike. But two brothers, and two brothers like this. Put your Bible down. Put your glasses on if you need them. It's all right. Two brothers. Like this. Here, stand so they can see. Two brothers. Together. Two brothers. Right? Twins. Two brothers. It's good. Everything's good. There's shalom there. Okay? But what happens? Jealousies and strife in their worship, right? What happened with Abel and Cain? May it never happen between us. But they begin to. And then what happens? Why? Why did he turn? Because one was jealous of the other's religion. Thank you. I want you to think about this. The first murder in history was about religion. So the nations rage. The brothers are going to rage. Things are going to happen. Religion. And he says, I see. He goes, I see what's happening between you. He said, your brother's doing right. All you have to do, he said, be careful, because sin is like an animal crouching at your door. He said, if you do right, things will be well. You will have shalom. But if you don't, that is like an animal waiting to get you. It's waiting to tear you up. How many know that sin is not fun? Well, sin it can be fun, but in the end, and so he's saying, you watch, it's waiting. So we see sin crouching, and we see brother against brother. And we see division. I'm going somewhere with this because I want you to see this. So now he's cast out. And where is Cain cast out to? A place called Nod. N-O-D. Everyone say Nod. You might call it Nod. The land of Nod. Sounds like the land of Oz, doesn't it? The land of Nod. And the land of Nod was a dry, barren place with no water. The rabbis will tell you that they had to irrigate the water system. That they had to take it and irrigate it. They had to work the land, but it was dry. And Cain and his family were a dry bunch of people. In fact, through the lineage of Cain, we see Tubal Cain come forward. We see rebellion come forward. We see what city did they build? What was it? You guys don't know what city? Babel. Babel. The Tower of Babel. Through his lineage. So that rebellion and that sin, it just continued and it continued in a dry place. And what's interesting, what I found was, watch this. The rabbis tell us, you won't see this in the Torah, but the rabbis tell us that this was the first place where men began to draw lines in the sand and say, this is my property line. You stay over there. See the picture? It carried through the generations. And so now, this is where the rabbis say, now they're dividing land up and they're saying, this is my land. This is not, I'm not talking about Adonai giving land to his people because the whole earth is his. But this was more of a division of, we're going to allocate property, we're going to put up, not the holy boundaries seen in Torah, but this was more of a sense of back to back. You stay there, I'll stay here. No fellowship. You stay there, I'll stay here. Turn back to each other. Are y'all still with me on this? Yeah. Properties and things to this extent. I'm going somewhere with this. Murder and strife are seen in Cain's lineage, as we know. So we see and understand that the significance of this rebellion was back to back. No fellowship. No shalom. No shalom. No waters. Dry place. Waters can be troubling and turbulent, but the place of waters, if you don't have water, it's usually because of sin. There's no life. Yeshua said, I come to give you what? Living water. Remember what we talked about with Yeshua, and he was the one who carried the living water? spiritual living water. And even physically, his body was of the earth, but it was not tainted. He was born of a virgin. And so think about that for just a moment. He was born of a virgin. He comes forth. We're going to go there in just a moment. But he comes to give living water because he's the water from heaven. Water many times is seen as salvation. Everyone say salvation. Questions or comments? I see the wheels turning. I see people thinking.
I don't know where the rabbis get that they were twins. The Bible says quite clearly that Abel was born first, and then she had another son.
Well, let me share something with you. I have twins. Noah was born first.
That's true.
See what I mean? So we have to watch the wording of that. We have to watch the translation and the wording of it. But Noah was born first. They're still twins, but he broke forth from the womb first. And we always kid him because Josiah was breached. When Josiah came forth, he came out backwards and he couldn't breathe. He was not breathing. You have never heard a rabbi pray as hard as I did over in the corner. You know, I'm praying, I'm saying every blessing, and I'm praying, speaking life, and then he began to breathe. But we always kid Noah and say, you know what, we thank God that you had a big head as a baby, because you made the way for Josiah to come forward. Yes?
I have twins in my family, and sometimes one of the twins is born, and the next one isn't even born until the next day because of such hard labor.
That's very interesting. So we see that. The concept here is sin and being separate. Genesis 1. I'm not going to go there, but I want you to go back to Bereshit 1 and think about the waters. Everyone say waters.
Waters.
Prophetically speaking, Adonai, his voice goes forward. It goes over the waters, but now he does something and you realize that he separates the waters. And he said, you waters are here, and there's heavenly water, you water there, and you water over there. And he calls the water in the land seas. Shamayim is the skies or the heavens. But he divides the waters. And I get thinking about that. I thought this, what if he was showing us a prophetic picture of what was to come? Of the nations dividing from each other, of sin causing separation, of sin causing brother and brother to turn their back and say, you there and me there, and no shalom. Of nations that would rage up and rise in war against Jerusalem. What if he was prophetically speaking that? What if? How many know we serve a prophetic God? Amen?
Yeah.
We do serve a prophetic God. Maybe he was speaking that. You realize that his people are called out just like those waters? We see it in a negative sense, but let me remind you of something. Israel was called out, right? Think about this, guys, for just a moment. Where was Israel called out from? Just like Abraham, Israel was called out. Abraham is now he is going from a normal guy to becoming Ivrit or a Hebrew. Why? What changed? His faith changed his status, but also his action. You think about it, what did he do? When did that transformation take place? When he crossed the waters. He was called out. When Adonai calls his people out, he calls them to gather together in a place. How many of you are called out? Right?
Amen.
So he calls you out, you hear his voice, but now he just like that water, gathered together. Watch this because I want to show you something. The Hebrews were called out of Egypt. Egypt represents the world, Mitzrayim. And so he calls his people out by his voice through Moshe. And now they're called to a place of what looks like an obstacle. They're brought forth before the sea. And as they stand before the sea, they're waiting on something to happen. And I'm reminded of some pictures here in my spirit of what the rabbis talk about Nashon in the writings that a brother reminded me of this week. But as they're waiting for something in those waters part, they pass through. And once they pass through, it's like a mikvah. They pass through and they become Ivrit. Are you seeing the picture? Interesting. Isn't it interesting that he brings them to the waters and those waters were troubled? How many know that the sea was troubled at that point? The waters were troubled. Roger taught on that last week. Israel passes through the water. And the Egyptians who tried to follow them through the water, what happened to those folks? Oops. They died. The Egyptians died. The Egyptians, who are a picture of the rage against the nation of Israel, died. They tried to pass through the waters. The waters took them out. Let me share this with you. Sometimes Adonai will bring you to your obstacle. Do you know why he brings you to that obstacle?
Sure.
He'll bring you to face your obstacle so that he will show you you can pass through it. And when you pass through it, he gets the credit. See, here's what we want to do. A lot of times as his people, we want to try to go around the obstacle. We look at the obstacle and we go, well, we know we're going from point A to point B, but there's this big thing. It's a big sea. It's got the raging waters and the voices going, and we're saying, help. But he says, watch what I do. I don't want you to go around it. I want you to go through it. And listen to this, because this amazed me. Once they went through it, it not only did the waters part for them, but the waters took out their very enemies that tried to kill them.
Amen.
Isn't that amazing? And we say, no, we want to go around it. We want to fly over it. Can you translate us out? And he says, sometimes I bring into those waters to watch me work. You have to go through those troubled waters sometimes. How many have ever been through the troubled waters? Amazing. Nashon was one who, again, the rabbis teach. Nashon was one, they said, well, what are we going to do? And there's one rabbinic text that says Nashon, who was the leader of Judah at the time, he was one of the guys with Moshe. Steps into the water and he begins walking, and the waters didn't part. And he walks up to the waist, the waters didn't part. And the waters didn't part until it got right up to his neck. And when he stood out in the waters in the neck, then the waters parted. Interesting. You ever been in that situation? How long, oh Lord? How long, Adonai? Maybe you got a little bit more walking through the waters to do. Wow, interesting. He brings you to it. He wants you to go through it so that he can divide it.
Amen.
Anybody getting this today? Let me show you another word here. Egypt and Israel, brother against brother. Mayim. Oh, one last thing I do want to share, another little rabbinic story, is that when the Egyptians died, there's a story that the angels rejoiced, and Adonai said, why are you rejoicing? Because the Egyptians are also my creation. Why are we rejoicing? Brother against brother. Do you think it pleases Adonai to all the strife and all the turbulent waters that are seen throughout? No. Scripture says he doesn't want any to perish. For he so loved the world that he gave his one and only begotten Son.
Amen.
That there could be shalom and face to face. One day, Yerushalayim will see it. Look at the word for water. Everyone say water. In the Hebrew, it is mayim, but I want you to see that this is a name. Some of you know this. You've been to the class, and this is a name, and this is a yod. This is a regular name. This would be a mem. This is called a mem sofit. These represent water. It kind of looks like a wave, doesn't it? Isn't that interesting? That if you look at it in the ancient Hebrew, it actually represents water. It's the number 40, and it represents water. So isn't it kind of cool how in the very word for water, we see a wave and a wave. But wait a minute, they're divided. And we see something dividing these waters, and that is the yod. And it is the picture of the hand. And so what is the word for, literally when we look at the word for water in Hebrew, we're seeing the waters divided by the very hand of heaven itself. Why does he bring us to those places? Because he says, I want you to see what I can do. I want you to see what I can do. Don't be afraid when you pass through the waters. I'll be with you. Turn to your neighbor and say, don't be afraid. He'll be with us, and listen, you may be waiting right now for those waters to split. Some of you feel like you're up to your neck. You're saying, where are you? He's saying, you just keep walking. You just keep doing what you're supposed to do, and watch me do what I'm good at doing. Amen? John Paul, you had your hand up, sir.
Is that a plural word?
Mayim, good. Because if you look at this, this is called a mem sofit. Now you may ask, why is that different wave from that wave? When you have a mem, which makes the M sound, everybody say, If you have it at the end of a word, it is a closed. That's just the rule in Hebrew. It's always closed. You never see a mem in the middle of a word closed or at the beginning of a word closed. You'll always see it when it's at the end of a word, it is always closed. Now that makes me think of something, because if your waters are looking turbulent, the final say-so is still waters. Still waters. He leads me beside the still waters. Adonai is trying to get his people to come to those places of still waters. Yes, Karen.
During my studies, the mem also represents the womb. So what I'm seeing in this word.
Wait a minute, don't steal my thunder. I think I know where you're going. Don't steal that. That'd be like, yeah, you don't want to do that. We don't want the grand finale in the middle of it. So what was once seen as an obstacle is no longer an obstacle. If you are sitting there facing your waters and you're saying, that's an obstacle to me, he's going to part the waters. What's the solution, guys, to the troubled waters? What's the solution to the trouble? What's the solution to individuals? What's the solution to the nations raging against Israel? Right now, you know, America's tried to do it through Bush and through Carter and through Clinton, and you go all the way back. They've always tried to get Israel and the other nations to sit together and sit down at the table, and it has always failed. It's interesting, as I met with the rabbis in Orlando about a month ago. One of the rabbis stood up who's in government. He shared with us a story. And he shared with us rabbis, there were about 200 people there, and he said, look, he said, we have a solution to this. And he shared his solution from a messianic viewpoint, other than everybody needs to come to know Messiah, right? That's ultimately what's going to happen. But he said, for now, he said, here is our solution. And he said, pray, because he said, people in Washington are starting to listen. He said, this is the only viable solution that people are saying, yeah, that'd work.
Yeah.
I won't share with you what it is. It'll be out. But he has ears in Washington. People are starting to listen. People in high up position, not only in Washington, but in Israel, are starting to listen and say, hey, the Messianic's got an idea. Wouldn't it be interesting that it would take the Messianic Jews to...
Hallelujah.
Yeah, but listen, that shalom will only come when Yeshua reigns.
Yes.
The nations are always going to roar. You're always going to have somebody roaring at you and raging at you and fussing with you, because back to back, I don't care who you are, you're always going to have it, because the world still has sin.
Amen.
Sinful nations and sinful people, individuals and nations. Back to the story of the waters. What's the answer to that? Here is Elisha, who goes into the land. And the land is decent. People are living there. What land is it? Jericho. How many have ever heard of Jericho? Right? Joshua fit the battle of Jericho. So here's Jericho, and he comes in. Elisha comes in wearing his master's prayer shawl. I find it interesting. He walks over to the waters and he strikes the waters. He said, where's the God of Eliyahu? Strikes the waters, and the waters part. And he crosses over, and the prophets come from Jericho, and they say, hey, look, same spirit is on him. You know, that's a picture of Messiah and his bride. Yeshua the Messiah, who is taken up while everyone is watching. And as he goes up, it says, I will send the Spirit down. It's a picture of the mantle. The prayer shawl that would come and cover his bride. And now his bride is picking up the mantle of Messiah and saying, where is the God of Eliyahu? Striking the waters split. The bride is walking through. Y'all seeing that picture?
Yeah.
How many for that kind of power, right? You ready for that? Where's the God of Elijah? So they say, hey, we have an issue here. We have a problem here. Can you fix it for us? And he said, what's the problem? This is my translation. What's the problem? He says, the waters are bad. We've lived here a long time. But he said, the waters are bad. Interesting. What are we going to do with that? Remember the waters? The waters are bad. He says, what can we do? He says, give me a new bowl, and I put salt in the bowl, and he throws them in the waters. And the waters are healed. Let's look at Joshua 6:26 before we leave today. I want you to find out, why were the waters cursed? Why were the waters cursed? Joshua 6:26, Joshua charged them at that time, saying, cursed be the man before Adonai who rises up and builds this city Jericho. He shall lay its foundation with his firstborn, and with his youngest he shall set up its gates. In other words, brother and brother. Two brothers again. This was a curse that goes way, way back, a long time ago. About 500 years. Watch this story, guys, because we read the scriptures and then we don't really understand what we're reading. You have to know what took place to bring about the curse before you know about the healing of the curse. The curse came when Joshua came in. Everybody's right where you're at. Just turn to your neighbor and say, I have spiritual eyes today. Would you do that? Hallelujah. I want you to do one thing before you do anything else. I want you to stand up. Stand up. I really want you to hear this. Stand up. Oh, wait. Everybody, if you can, stand up. Okay, sit back down. Some of you had to shake something off. What happened with these waters? Way back when, the waters were bad waters because Joshua comes in with his people and they take the city. Follow the story here. You're going to learn something. They take the city. What happens with that city? That city is seen as a city that is it's done. The walls fell down. If you've ever studied the history of that, it wasn't just big walls. In fact, they had a plethora of walls. They had the walls were in sets of 3. You had your outer bands of walls around the city. Then you had another mound that went up with other walls. And then the final walls were the innermost walls. Those walls were thick enough where some say 3 chariots could race each other. They were very thick walls. So when you talk about the walls coming down of Jericho, it wasn't just one set of walls. You're talking 3 sets in circular form around the city. Are you still with me?
People lived in them.
They lived in the innermost area. So those 2 outer wall areas were actually a defense or a protection for the city. And so when those walls came down, at the voice of Adonai who shook those walls, all the walls came down. Now we tend to think that nobody ever lived in Jericho again. If you study, for time's sake, I won't give you how many folks. That city continued.
That's right.
How many ever thought that Jericho was done and never came back? That's okay. See, we think that, but no, people lived in that city. If you study the history of it, there were people who lived in that city and it continued on. But here's what was taken down. Listen to me when I say this. There was a curse placed upon the city that whoever lifts up its foundation or its gates and its walls, everybody say foundation. Foundation. Your foundation represents your authority. The leaders, the governors of the city, everybody say governors. The leaders and the governors would meet at the city gates and they would do transaction and business. That's where you saw your legal system. And so he's saying, if anybody ever tries to raise this up and put their hope in man's, and I'm getting spiritual here, but put their hope in man's government, because Adonai brought those walls down.
Right.
You all with me?
Amen.
So people lived there, but the walls were never built. I got to study in that. Even we see the prophets coming. There were schools of the prophetic in Jericho. Jericho continued on, but watch this. 500 years go by. People are living there, there's families and everything else, but no walls. Now we see kings going throughout Israel, and Israel's now in the land and they've established. But what's really interesting is there's a king who does more wickedly than any of the other kings before him, and his name was Ahab. How many have ever heard of King Ahab? He is in your face, Adonai, rebellion. It says that he did more wickedness than the kings before him. He even marries a woman, Jezebel, and we say, oh, Jezebel. Jezebel was a princess. She was of royalty. The problem with Jezebel was she did not know the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Her issue, she actually got her husband to begin to worship Ashtoreth and worship Baalim. You know the history behind that. They would murder their babies. And if you study anything about Israel, what they would do is they wouldn't get any rain. There was no water. Why was there no water? Because Adonai said in the Torah, he said, I'm the one that gives you water. I'm the one that gives you life. If there was no water and there was a drought, something was wrong because of sin, right?
Right.
I'm going somewhere with this, so follow close. So here comes Ahab, and Ahab begins to worship with his wife, and he begins to kill the true prophets and begins to establish false prophetic and false worship. Guess what happens? A man rises up under Ahab, and he establishes the gates again in Jericho. If you read it, history tells us that when this man who stood up, and he was a governor in Ahab's people, he was a leader. He says, let's rebuild those gates. And history tells us, along with Scripture, that his firstborn died and his last died. Because it was a fulfillment of the curse. Are you all with me and following this? There's some history here. It had to do with governing authority. Here's Ahab, who, by the way, there was no rain and there was a drought because he's worshiping these false and pagan gods. And here's Elijah who comes along. He says there will be no rain for 3 years. And then Elijah calls for rain, and then the rain comes after he takes water and he pours it upon the true altar. Interesting. All this ties together. And so under Ahab, this guy establishes the gates of authority again, the governing authority. We will trust in what we're going to do. And he loses his firstborn, and he loses his baby. You know what they would do? History tells us that, for some of you history buffs, they would take, recently they found in Rome, that there was a place where they found all these babies, 450 babies, buried under the gates. Buried along in pockets, and they would put them in huge vessels, like they remind me of pots, like flower plant pots, big ones. And they would put these babies. And what they would do, guys, is listen to this. To establish their government and their authority, we're going to do it our way. They would take their babies and they would sacrifice them, and they would put them under the gates of the city. See the picture there? Interesting. Death, no life. Questions or comments? No water, no life, troubled waters when there is waters, and death. But here comes Elijah, who comes along and says, wait a minute, the God of Israel can redeem this. The God of Israel can fix those waters. But it takes the salt to do it. It takes the salt to do it. Why didn't Elijah just say, okay, waters be healed by my word? Why didn't Elijah just take his mantle and go, boop? Why did he swing it 3 times and say, in the name of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, be healed? Do you ever think about that? See, I think about things like that. Why didn't he do that? No, he took the waters because that's symbolic of something that would come. If we are the bride of Messiah, Scripture tells us this. He wants to heal these turbulent waters, not just in us and in our families and in our homes and in our communities. He wants to heal the waters of the land of people. And we are called to be what? Salt. How does Yeshua could speak a word and say, healing to Syria. You know, do you realize that Yeshua could reveal himself to a whole nation of people? By the way, Scripture says he will reveal himself to an entire nation, which will be Israel. And in a day their eyes will be open. And he says, I will open up a fount in the land. Water. That'll be good water, right? It's interesting. Why doesn't he just appear to whole nations of people? I'm hearing stories of, there's people who are in countries, especially in Muslim countries, who are having dreams of Yeshua. They don't even know who Yeshua is, and they're having these visions and dreams of him appearing to them. But he's not doing it as nations. Why not? Even in Israel today, he's not revealing himself on a grand scale. You know why? He's doing it through the salt. And if you and I are the salt, here is Yeshua, who's taken his salt, and he's putting it in the troubled waters of the nations. What is salt supposed to do? Heal, purify. What are we supposed to do? Are we just supposed to gather on Shabbat and go, hallelujah, and then go home and say, that was a great service? Well, I hope that's true. But hear me when I say this. Salt is active. Salt is effective. If salt loses its flavor, it's cast out. Put it on the steps out here so people don't slip. But salt brings life. Everybody say life. And so as the bride of Messiah, we are called to be salt to the world and say, we're going to bring healing to these situations. Okay, Rabbi, that sounds really good, but where in the world do I start in Mansfield, Ohio? Right? One person at a time. One person at a time. Do what you're called to do. And be the salt in your situations at home. Be the salt in the situations of your congregation. Be the salt in your job. What are you called to do? How can you be the salt? Watch your words. Watch what you think. Watch the actions of your hands. Be salt. Find 2 people around you. Tell them, be the salt. Would you do that?
That's what the television is being used for right now. And Jan and Paul Crouch when they established TBN, what we know as TBN, why Paul was given the vision of salt and water.
We can be, you can be the salt through various media.
Right.
If you know, we right now are live streaming. There's folks that are watching. We have people that watch in different states and different countries. They can't come to us, but we can come to them. How many are glad for that? Everybody say shalom. Shalom. So this is something that we can do through media. We can do it through various aspects. But we are called to be the salt. I want to show you something interesting here because we're going to go back to the water. Salt and water are connected here. And it all has to do with the governing authority. Before I let you go home, before I let you go, you have to understand that you have authority in you, and that is Yeshua. If you don't realize that you have authority in you to be who you are supposed to be, you will lose every time. You say, well, Rabbi, those are hard words. You have to know who your authority is. Say, know my authority. Know that you have Yeshua living in you. He is the governing authority. I'm not talking about being rude to people, but there are sometimes you have to take authority over situations. When I see my children at home, and sometimes, listen, I wish I could tell you they're always nice and kind and loving. I wish I could paint a picture of them all gathered around the table singing, Kumbaya. It's not like that. There are days when they fuss and they fight. Guess what I have to do? I have to take my authority and realize that I have a governing authority over those brothers that argue. And I have to say, yeah, I have to tell them, harpoon. I didn't say I was God, but I said cease and desist, right? To tell them to settle down and listen to the governing authority. You have to also be that where you are in your life. You have to know the authority of the Word of the Father in you. I want you to see one more thing before we leave. We're going to partake of communion today. The salt healed the waters. Let's go back to the word for name. Remember the water and the waters? Look at Isaiah Yeshayahu 9, 6 and 7. There would come one who would come out from a virgin. Watch this. In the days of him he yelled, that's not what I want. Isaiah 9, 6. It says, for unto us a child is born, and unto us a son is given, and the government shall rest upon his shoulders. I don't like this translation. The government shall rest upon his shoulders. Everyone say government. Government. And what does it say? And his name shall be called Wonderful One, or Marvelous. Peleo etz el Gibor, Sar Shalom, the Wonderful One. The one who would be able to do, Scripture says he's able to do all things. The mighty God. And it says the Sar Shalom, the Prince of Peace. And it says the government will rest on his shoulders, right? Everybody say Sar Shalom. And it says, and of the increase of his government, you'll notice increase is mentioned twice here. But notice that word lemar. The increase of his government, or his well-being, there is no end. And it talks about him ruling and reigning on the throne of David. That David's rule and reign, that through the lineage of David, one would come who would be what we understand is born of a virgin. Now, there are folks who will debate that concept of virgin, but understand. Some say, well, Alma or Betullah, what is it? Rabbi, was it one who had what was it? A virgin is a virgin, guys. And I'll give you another clue here and another concept, because when we talk about the government, the increase of his, it says chieftainship. I sure don't like that, because it actually has to do the increase of his government. Everyone say government. That's the authority of his government. It will have no end. In other words, it's just going to keep going and going and going. And how many know that the Messiah is still going and going and going? His kingship, his rule, his government. There are peoples who are rising up, Jew and Gentile, who are recognizing the leadership. They are being the Messiah to the world around them. Give you a little clue here. That word lamar, you don't see it here, but in the Torah scroll, notice the word, notice the letter Mem. See the Mem? Lemar. Everybody say increase. The authority increase will never end with the Messiah of the one who would come from a virgin. Now, remember what I told you about never, ever, ever seeing a closed name in the middle of a word? In the Torah, that name, in the Tanakh rather, that name is closed. And everybody goes, why did the rabbis write it with a closed name? Because the name also represents a womb. What's it saying? There's a little, I'm giving you something, this is, you're not going to hear this in your traditional thing. This is telling you, this is a clue, the increase of his government. That is a picture of the Messiah, who many rabbis believe that name is closed. It's a picture of a closed womb. He would come forth from a virgin.
Yep.
You realize that when there is a rabbinic prayer to say, a Jewish prayer to say, I believe it's the Hasid that say, bless this woman and may her waters be opened as she's giving birth to a baby.
Yeah.
You want the water to break and then you want the baby to come forth, right? So that is a picture of the waters, the main being closed. It's a picture of the virgin womb. What is Isaiah 9 telling us? That the Messiah would be born and come from a closed maiden or a closed womb. She would be a virgin. The increase of his government, there will be no end. No longer will you see brother and brother with the backs against each other. But now because of his government and his governing authority, they could now be face to face. Even, listen to me, Jew and Gentile, brother and brother.
Yes.
Man and woman, Chinese and Mexican, you name it. African American, Russians and Americans, they are all in the Messiah. They can all face each other and have unity again, destroying that bondage of sin. It's in the Messiah that we can be face to face and have that governing authority. Always reminded of, friends of mine went to Israel and they were worshiping at the wall. There were people who were there as they were just standing, they were talking to Israel, and they met this group of Japanese people. Could not speak a lick of English. And they tried to communicate, how are you? How are you today? Why is it that people think they have to get loud when people don't read it? How are you? And they're, oh, they look at him and smile. They say, are you enjoying your stay? They would look at him and smile. They said, we don't know what they're saying. You know. They said, they have no clue what. So they said, well, hallelujah. And the whole group of Japanese people went, hallelujah, hallelujah. They said, you? They said, yes, hallelujah. What brought them together? Yeshua. One in Messiah. One in Messiah. Before I leave you with this, I want you to see something. I truly believe that the Father speaks to us many times in the seasons that we're in with signs and wonders. As I prepared this, I found two things that they've discovered in Israel. 5 miles south of Jerusalem, they have discovered that there is an ancient city, and those waters are now flowing. Ancient waters that date back, way back when, from an ancient, it actually turned it into a church at one point. They believed it was a castle at another point, but these waters are now flowing. Here's a picture. Look at the waters. And they are clean waters in the land, just outside of Jerusalem. Yireh Shalom, the place where he says, I will see to bring in my authority and government. Shalom. And waters represent salvation. If you have water, you have life. Everyone say life. Life. So they just recently discovered this. It was this week. Now, several weeks ago in the month of January, they discovered something else. They discovered an ancient coin in Jerusalem. It's actually not a coin at all, but it's a seal. It's a mark. A seal is something that if you were to be in leadership, you would roll up the scroll and you would take as a leader, you wanted people to know that you were the one responsible for what the word said. So you would take a wax, you would melt the wax over it, and then you would take your seal and you would stamp it in there. And then when I handed it to you and said, this is from the leader, they'd say, how do I know? Oh, there's his seal. You break the seal, you read the scroll. That tells you who is the authority behind that word. I have in this, I was extremely blessed, and I'm humbled to say this, but I received something from the state of Ohio that recognized, they said, we recognize Rabbi William Holbrook as the leader of Sar Shalom, a good citizen within the state of Ohio, and we want to honor him and all this. I had no clue that was coming. I was like, wow. You know? I mean, to some of us, we go, wow, that's kind of cheesy. Not to me, I think that's kind of cool. You know, the state of Ohio, listen, that's saying that the representation, the government is saying, we're honoring you, we're recognizing you. Now, I could tell you that. How many would believe me? Only 3 or 4. It's one thing to tell you, but it's another thing to prove it. And if you go and you look in the glass bookcase, you'll see it. And you know how I know it's from there? How do I know that Mary didn't send it or Roger didn't send it? He's nice. It's got the state seal on it. And that certifies exactly who sent it. I want you to see up here because they recently discovered this last month. It's a seal. And under the seal, help me to get this right, Father. Under the seal is ancient Hebrew words. It's interesting, you can't really make this out, but if I could draw it for you, I would show you what it's a picture of. This is a seal of an ancient governor of Jerusalem. They recently found this. This was a governor of Jerusalem, and it says Sari Hare. It has to do with, it literally has the word Sar in it. And it's saying the city, it means literally city of peace, city of Shalom. And it is the governor of Jerusalem, the city of Shalom, the authority of Shalom. They found this. It's 2,700 years old, which is amazing in itself. But you know what amazed me? You can't tell from where you're sitting, but this is a picture of 2 men.
Oh, it is.
Of 2 brothers. And they are face to face. Wow. So what's this a picture of? I believe prophetically that he's healing the waters, that he's going to bring healing. I believe that Yeshua is coming back, of the increase of his government. And by the way, where is he coming back to rule and reign? Jerusalem. He is going to govern Jerusalem by the Father's word. He's going to rule and reign. And brother will once again have shalom under the authority of Yeshua the Messiah. I believe this is no coincidence why they just found this. I believe we're in that season where we need to keep our eyes focused.
Amen.
Keep your eyes looking to Yeshua. How many are ready? Amen. Keep your eyes. And listen, while we are waiting, be active. Serve the people around you. Serve your communities. Serve in this congregation. Don't just sit on your thumbs. You want to be serving in Messiah and be the salt, because he's calling us to a place of reconciliation in Yeshua. Amen? Amen. Amen. Did you learn anything this morning? Yeah. Would you stand? Praise Messiah. Mike, would you please come? I'm going to ask you. We want to partake of communion today. So I'm going to ask, if you all would just be here, I'm going to ask that we take the communion and bring it up. Thank you so much. I want you to hold it because we're going to partake together. I want to ask, Bones and Esther, would you please come? I'm going to ask if you wouldn't mind. Would you just hold one of these together? Help us serve the body. We love you. Esther, would you just stand beside him? Come on up. We're going to ask, come up, get it, and take it back to your seat. We're going to hold it. Well, I don't know that we have time today, but thank you. I appreciate that. We just don't have the time to. We could possibly do it at another time, though. Take the bread, we're going to say a blessing over the bread. We'll say a blessing over the cup. Just hold that in your hand if you would. This is a picture of the Mashiach, the broken body of Messiah. Pierced, has holes in it, stripes. By his wounds we are healed. So we remember that as we partake of that today. Hold the bread up if you would. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam. Father, we thank you for the bread. Blessed are you, our Father and our God, King of the universe, who brings bread forth from the earth. We thank you for Yeshua in Messiah's name. All those people said amen. Amen. You may partake. Blessed are you, Father, King of the universe, who gives us the fruit of the vine. We thank you for joy, for simcha. In the blood of Mashiach, Father, this is a picture of that covenant cup. We thank you, Father, for your covenant with your people, both Jew and Gentile. In Mashiach Yeshua we pray. May we, Father, be the salt that you call us to be. And it's not by might, it's not by power, it's by your Ruach, your Spirit. Hashem Yeshua Mashiach. All those people said amen. Amen. We want to wish you a wonderful Shabbat. How many are blessed today? Blessed? Amen. If you need prayer today, I'm going to ask some of our prayer team folks to come up. Let me say the blessing over you, and then we will send you forth. Have a wonderful weekend. Say the blessing over you. Yivrech Adonai v'yishmerecha, Yair Adonai panav elecha v'yihunecha, Yisai Adonai panav elecha v'yis may he lift his face and shine upon you and give you shalom. In the mighty name of Sar Shalom, the Prince of Peace, Yeshua, our Messiah. And all his people said amen. 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 Give two people a hug, tell them Shabbat Shalom. Prayer team, come if you would. Anybody needs prayer this morning? Have a wonderful, wonderful Shabbat. Shalom, shalom.